and he gave her $14 million cash, which, remember, this is 1992. I mean, that is a lot of money at that day.
It still is. My goodness.
It still is. And a 24-room mansion?
45-room mansion in Connecticut.
45-room mansion in Connecticut. A penthouse and Trump Tower.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to Life's Third Act, an enlightening look at estate planning, retirement, and beyond.
In Trump's case, there was the prenup, and then there was also, the changes that occurred after. So there were at least 4 major revisions over this 13-year period with this original document that was signed. And those revisions have to be handled with extraordinary care to avoid invalidating the agreement. So when I talk about the principles, when you're thinking about prenuptial, and I'll use the word postnuptial agreements, when you're thinking about that sort of thing, whether it involves divorce or not, but let's assume that you're thinking about it in the context of, I'm not worried that I'm going to get divorced. I'm worried that when I die, that my kids get the things I want them to have.
Yeah. So it's more of a protection for your children if you have them for a pre-marriage before this the one you're talking about,
the
like
assets,
the prenuptial one?
Exactly. The assets that you've acquired before the marriage. Okay. It could include assets you had during the marriage if it was, if you had a marital agreement in which things were fully disclosed. So let's talk about the main things to think about when people are considering those, because these come into play actually in this case. The biggest issue is to assure that the other party, I'm going to say the less financially sophisticated party, it probably is also the party with the fewest assets. It could be that there's complete equilibrium between the parties. And when older couples, you're more likely to see that equilibrium in net worth and sophistication. But traditionally, there's been a disparity, right? One party has assets, sophistication, the other doesn't. So historically, and I would say still, it's imperative that the other party have excellent legal representation, number one. And if you have to pay for it, it's okay for you, the person who wants to get this agreement done. It's okay for you to pay for it, just so it's clear that that person, does not owe any duty to you, does not have any relationship to you. It's best for you to not know them. Certainly, it's best for them not to ever done any legal work for you. This should be as arm's length as possible. It's even better if you give the money to your spouse, and your spouse in turn, or your fiance, gives the money to this lawyer. So that's number one thing to accomplish. Number two is disclosure. Emphatically, both these uniform codes that I just described, and I guarantee you the law, that the statute that exists in New York has this common denominator, and that's that you definitely have to have full and total disclosure. It'll kill a deal every time. If somebody doesn't put on a financial statement, which would include a balance sheet, statement of personal net worth, an income statement showing all sources of income, et cetera, if there aren't documents to corroborate that these were provided to the other party, that is potentially a way to undo this deal. And even if you provide those documents and you leave out some key assets or you mischaracterize their value, I mean, there's so many ways that you can be accused of defrauding the other party, of exploiting the other party. These are the things you worry about. So when you want to have agreements that are enforceable in this very intimate, trusting context, and that's what haunts these deals, is that it's a special deal. It's a deal between people who simultaneously are saying, I love you, you can trust me, I'm going to be your spouse, I'm not going to go out on you, I'm going to be this loyal, honest person. Incidentally, sign this piece of paper that says that you won't take my money.
Yeah, that's so romantic.
It's a paradox. It's an odd situation, incongruous. Yeah, and so the courts, you can see, because of the tendency of one or both parties to be naive and trusting, that it presents opportunity for others. So in this case, full and total disclosure, a document that's delivered to the other side, acknowledged by their attorney, filed with, maybe even if there's a court filing of any sort through the probate or whatever, there should be evidence that these documents were exchanged. Anyway, so that's number two. You want to ask something?
Yeah. So after a prenup, everything that's listed on that prenuptial agreement, let's say they signed off on, May 30th, 2025, right? Anything that happens come June that they purchase or anything, would that then, since it's not the prenup, it would be open for discussion or?
Yeah, any new assets, they'd have a duty to update, and they certainly would update before a revision. So if there's going to be some renegotiation, as there was between Ivana and Donald, then new documents have to be exchanged. Now, it helps that Donald could say of her, look, she was involved.
Yes.
It wasn't as if she was at home all day and I was going off to be at the business. She was at the business. But we all know that someone in Trump's position could be involved in deals all the time that wouldn't come across her desk, that she wouldn't have seen. So either one of them could have done that. So there were some questions related to the extent to which there was fair disclosure. But another thing is that there can't be anything resembling coercion or anything that would diminish someone's freedom to object. And things such as having a signature, a signing off on a prenup within even a month of the wedding has been declared before by courts to say that created unnecessary pressure. It wasn't really an option to walk away. I can tell you, there are cases out there where literally it was put in front of, or at least the signing occurred days before the wedding, and a number of those occasions. And under those circumstances, it really invites the argument later that, look, we'd sent out invitations. My friends were coming into town. How could I possibly say no?
Yeah, go through with the party.
So it's just an issue that you want to be sure that everything that gives freedom of changing your position, freedom to do things differently, freedom to object. Those are all, you want those elements to be there to avoid anything resembling undue influence or coercion. And of course, the fraud you avoid by being sure everything is fully and totally disclosed. And then moving on, when you do a revision of that agreement, all those elements are still there. You've got to update all the information, or again, you'll be accused of having done something in the background since you had signed the original agreement, and then say you've been married a year or two, that now you have this new deal going on and you want to change the agreement and maybe you don't want to disclose the details of that deal. I mean, that is a classic scenario in which, that amendment would not be honored. So prenups and postnups are historically have been tricky instruments because of those conflicting considerations that I just described. And for that reason, courts have been quite willing to find what they called unconscionability. And unconscionability means that any deal that really looks like it was just grossly unfair, then that's a deal that a judge will probably find a way to undo. But I can tell you that both statutes, particularly the Uniform Premarital and Marital Agreement Act, the newer model that's being adopted by more states now, this model is very clear on saying, look, when we see unconscionability, we can undo it. Even if you've done everything, you've disclosed, you've informed, you've hid nothing. And you may say, well, gee, this is the other side of the table. Yeah. Since when are we a nanny state that's going to say, our government is going to protect one side of a contract because even though they're an adult, they're not impaired, et cetera, or just because they got a bad deal and we don't like it. And, historically in contracts, that's not the law in contracts. But I can tell you, because of this very extraordinary scenario in which these types of agreements are involved, the nature of the relationship is such that it's almost fiduciary in one way. Fiduciary meaning they have this duty, this inherent duty to each other as a husband and wife. And then on the other hand, one party is saying, but this is arm's length, and I put this in front of you, I disclosed to you the documents, and you signed it, and you had a lawyer. Even with all those things, under the latest legislation, and this is the trend in the courts, is to say, look, if it's unconscionable, I don't know how it happened, maybe the lawyer malpracticed, whatever, courts will try to find a way to undo it. So you have to think about how far you want to reach in a deal. So guys that have prenups, and Trump was smart in this way, the terms of his prenup were not harsh. They were not draconian in the event of a divorce because he agreed. I think the maximum that she could have gotten under, these are after revisions, the maximum under the latest revision, I think, was $25 million.
Yep, $25 million was the cap.
Was the cap. And now remember, we're talking 90s. We're talking 80s when this was being contemplated. So, that was a ton of money at that time, even though Trump probably touched $1 billion in value in the 90s and maybe even the 80s. There was some up, there was a big up and there was a big down when he crashed temporarily with the real estate market. So anyway, it was hard to look at that and say this is unconscionable. We don't know what the courts would have said because this did not go to trial. So even though this is a case where I think Trump, if you look at it, looks like he did all the right things. All the principles I've described to you, it seems like he did all those things correctly. But there's always some vulnerability. And if the prenup is thrown out, and this is the risk to Trump, if a court declared that the prenuptial agreement is not valid, then he's at the mercy of New York domestic relations law, which means that New York is like most of the states. It's an equitable distribution state, which means that generally, it's a generalization, is that the court will look at what was contributed during the course of the marriage to the value of the marital estate, meaning of the assets of the marriage, and they don't attribute it normally 50-50 because they can consider, particularly at higher levels of income, they're more inclined to consider an allocation based on contribution. So if you have a billionaire, let me give you extreme, billionaire home and a homemaker, and this billionaire marries the homemaker when he has, $100,000, say $1 million, and it becomes, this billion. She would go in and claim, she would say, this is all marital property. The value went from $1 million to $1 billion during the course of our marriage, and that means it's all part of the marital estate. And so
she was at home supporting with the kids.
Yeah. Well, she's home. She's doing something. But courts are not, and nor do I think they should be inclined to say, we're going to give you 50% because you were married at the time. So even though courts have discretion to allocate that, the case law is pretty clear that they do consider contribution and, efforts and whatnot. Yeah. So, but my point in giving you this example is to say, how much would that have been, though? Would they give that homemaker as much as $100 million? I think so. That wouldn't be uncommon at all. So if you were to take Trump's case, most of Trump's net worth occurred from the time they married. Remember, they married in 1977, so we're going all through the 1980s. 1980s were good for Trump. Now, he had problems at the end, granted, but that was a good era for him.
Those were the big times for him.
So I'm oversimplifying this. Trump clearly had arguments he could have made. Trump had his assets in various LLCs, various entities. Some of his assets were held in trust, family trusts, that had been set up through his dad, Fred, and maybe his grandfather. So not everything is on the table at play, but there's all sorts of mischief that a divorce lawyer can make when they start looking at entities you formed, because they can look with great detail, scrutinize all the transactions and try to find ways in which you commingled a marital asset with it. And it's so easy to make that mistake. So it's so easy for what would otherwise be purely a quote-unquote separate asset to become polluted with some marital funds. And once it becomes polluted, a court can say it's quote-unquote hopelessly commingled. So, and then of course it would default to the marital estate. So there's risk when if Trump had taken the position, look, I dotted the I's, I crossed the T's, I'm going to go to trial, and I'm not going to agree to give her any more than what this agreement calls for. And that agreement called for something less than $25 million, even though $25 million was a ceiling. Yeah. It called for less than that, significantly less, not a whole lot less. But so Trump could have stuck to his guns But that would have been, a mistake. Trump is a very practical guy.
Well, I can't help but wonder, too, if, did Ivana actually get a paycheck? You know what I'm saying? I mean, she's the CEO and president of Trump's Casa Hotel, the casino, Atlantic City, manager of the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. I mean, was there, did she get, a check every week? Monthly?
Sure.
I mean, you have to wonder, or did it just all go into the family pot? You know what I mean? The family bank account.
No, but keep in mind, her paycheck, just like Trump's paycheck, is a marital asset.
Okay.
So anything you earn with your labor during a marriage is a marital asset. And that's how easy you could have Trump working in a separate asset. Let's say that Trump Tower were owned by a separate family entity, meaning a Trump family entity, not his married family. And so let's assume that he's working on that during the marriage, and he spends time there, and he takes that Trump Tower, and suddenly it becomes double its value. So he has to fastidiously pay himself a salary that represents fair and reasonable compensation for his services, because his services are marital. So whenever you or your spouse go out and work, you're engaged in a marital activity. If a doctor goes out and works, anything he earns as a doctor when he's married is marital money. It's not separate money, it's marital money. So in this case, if let's say Trump just paid himself $500,000 a year to manage Trump Tower, and it became, much more valuable over the course of 10, 13 years. Clearly the argument be made that in effect, the value of his services was probably closer to $1 million a year, and as a result, effectively, he contributed marital assets, meaning the part that he wasn't paid, that he should have been paid, that other $500,000. Let's say the market value is $1 million of his services. So in effect, what he's doing is taking $1 million of marital money and investing it in this business. So then you have to figure out the rate of appreciation. How do you do that math, that compounding, and keep it fully separate? It's not something that you can't possibly do mathematically. You can have accountants who can try to tease out those things, but it can get very confusing, and especially when you have accountants on the other side arguing that it's hopelessly commingled. So there's lots of risk when you decide that you want to hold by a marital agreement, and yet there's some possibility that there are Achilles heels in various entities, and that maybe there's a mistake in one of the LLCs you formed. Maybe it's not valid. Maybe it expired. Maybe there's a claim made on the part of the marital estate to something that it contributed. You didn't know it contributed to that property because you have lots of things going on and lots of moving parts. So Trump didn't want to become too technical in trying to enforce this agreement. One thing we know about Trump, whether you like him or not, is he, at the end of the day, he's pretty practical. He may take positions that sound crazy, but when the dust settles, it turns out that he's willing to be very practical. And in this case, his wife was stirring up a lot of dust, Ivana. She was saying a couple of the allegations she was making to have this set aside. Number one, she said it was unconscionable. Despite all the things I mentioned to you already, she said it was unconscionable. She said that her lawyer, the lawyer that was provided to her by Trump, apparently had a business relationship with Roy Cohn. So now Roy, those of you who don't know the notorious Roy Cohn, he's a guy worth reading about. I encourage you, I'm sure somewhere on YouTube there's some good videos about Roy Cohn. He was a guy who originally came to light during the McCarthy hearings in the 50s, and he was a bad guy. I mean, he was ruthless. He was aggressive. He ruined a lot of lives, and he was very exploitive. He just was a guy who developed a very mean, manipulative reputation, an opportunistic reputation, really, as a lawyer. And so he was from New York, I think, originally. So he ends up practicing in Manhattan the rest of his career. And he was just known as being a shark. I mean, in kind of the hard sense of the word, not the good sense of the word. But he was effective. and he nurtured this reputation. He was proud of this reputation. So that he and Trump were a match made in heaven when it came to, he was Trump's lawyer for over a decade in the most pivotal period, arguably, of Trump's business career. You know, Trump was always in litigation. He was in litigation with unions. He was in litigation with municipal agencies, contractors. I mean, we all know this about Trump. He's in litigation a lot. He was then too, and he had a lawyer who really had a reputation. And so a lot of people steered clear of having to be in court, you know, with Roy Cohn. So Roy Cohn apparently had I don't know if he was a partner. That's probably going too far. But he had a relationship with this lawyer that, according to the statements made by Ivana's attorney, was the person who suggested this lawyer that represented her. So it's just another one of those things. So she argued coercion. I don't know the details of that. We all can imagine ways in which you could say, well, he put me in a position where I had to sign this. I don't know what the details of that were, but we could easily imagine scenarios where, you know, it wouldn't sound crazy, okay? So she had lots of things that she could just throw out there. And you throw enough stuff against the wall, and there's always a significant chance. There's some chance, certainly, that something sticks. And she just needed something to stick. That means that she's free of that agreement. And Trump would have been foolish to have not gone ahead and settled that. So they do end up settling. And it was after they filed in March of 90, and they ended up wrapping it up in what? May of 92?
Well, like you were saying beforehand, that she, even in her deposition, she accused him of rape.
Oh, I forgot about that. So
yeah, that was a biggie. You're like, oh, and then later took that back.
Yeah, she didn't. And let's give her credit. I think that she meant it when she took it back, because she didn't have to.
Yeah.
I mean, you can. That's another example of how, you know, there's too much at stake for Trump here to have insisted on going to trial on this prenup. So, but on the other hand, shifting to her, given who Trump was, giving his lawyer, she knows her husband, you know, there's reason for Trump to settle and there's reason for her to settle, because Trump could have been crazy enough to go forward and maybe alleged other things in which maybe accused her of dissipating marital assets. It could have gotten much worse. And they had already spent who knows how many million on lawyers.
Yeah, and that's just, you know, it's a lot of time, and they've got kids, right?
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. There's no question that was at work in Trump's head. I mean, the kids were real important to Trump.
Yeah.
He knew she was a good mother. There was, though incidentally, she did want primary care of the kids.
Well, and you got to remember, like, maybe he's wanting to hurry this up so he can be with Marla.
A good point.
That's going on too.
So yeah, I mean, Marla, we know he ends up marrying Marla shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
I'm sure that he agreed later that was a mistake, but
she didn't get much money from what I understand.
No, she didn't walk away with much at all. That agreement held better. So this case settles.
I think I said that the divorce was granted on grounds of cruel and inhumane treatment.
Yeah, and I doubt Trump complained about that, but
just get it over with, right?
So here's what she got, though. She got $14 million cash. She had some assets already that were in her name, perhaps from the marriage, not from before the marriage, but during the marriage, she had some assets that were not at dispute. We won't get into that. She also, and Trump left that alone, and he gave her $14 million cash, which, remember, this is 1992. I mean, that is a lot of money at that day.
It still is. My goodness.
It still is. And a 24-room mansion?
45-room mansion in Connecticut.
45-room mansion in Connecticut. A penthouse in Trump Tower. She got the right to use a Mar-a-Lago a month a year. Yeah.
Can you? Now you think about that now. I mean, with him, well, before she passed.
He probably bought her out of that.
Maybe, but that'd be like, I'm going to my ex-husband and he's married, and that would just be weird. I wouldn't want to go there, but I guess it's a beautiful place.
But it is. But here's what's kind of inspiring about this, or encouraging, I should say, is that these people, both, to their credit, put aside all this personal animosity. And it must have been really hard for her.
I'm sure
for
it was,
Ivana.
knowing what
Yeah,
your
I mean,
husband
the
did.
humiliation of this thing with Marla Maples. So they both put it aside, and very shortly thereafter were friends again, meaning up to the day that she died, she and Trump, Ivana and Donald, continued to talk periodically. Trump apparently solicited her advice. He respected her opinion. He even called her from the White House. I heard that more about the first, of course, that would be the first term. But during the first term, there were apparently a number of occasions when she and Trump would talk, and when Trump was in the White House, and he invited her to the inauguration in 17. So, I mean, Trump was very respectful of her, and he attended the funeral. He had very kind remarks to say. He said that she was a wonderful, incredible woman and a mother. He really was very moved. And apparently her death was something that was difficult for him. It was that part of it is that when you expect someone to die, when they have cancer and stuff, you I think that you tend to get acclimated, or you start to be able to absorb the idea that this person is dying over a period of time. In her case, no one saw this coming.
No, just a fall.
And it was a fall. It occurred in 22. She was 73 years old.
Yeah.
And it's sad because she fell down a flight of stairs. She happened to be by herself in her penthouse and wasn't found till the next day, probably in the mid-afternoon. So she could have been there, for all we know. The fall could have occurred at 2 a.m. or 12 at night. She was last seen that night, I think around 10 o'clock the night before. So, it's really sad when something like that happens, because, it wasn't if she were frail and it was expected. It was just like that. And Trump was, and I don't doubt this for a second, I hope that even his enemies will not question that, this was very, very sad for him.
Yeah.
It occurred in 22, and there wasn't a lot of press about it, but what I've been able to read from behind the scenes is he was completely taken off guard by it, and he felt that he lost somebody that he relied on in some ways. Not regularly. It's not as if they're talking every week, but they regularly touch base. So regular in that sense. And I think she was a very, very impressive woman.
Yes, definitely.
We should take a couple minutes here and talk about what happened during the latter part of her life. After the divorce, she became this relatively successful business person.
Yes, I mean, she was on TV. She did a couple, TV appearances. One being one of my favorite movies was The First Wives Club. She showed up on that.
I had forgotten that she had been in that. I read that somewhere.
Yeah, with Goldie Hawn, Bette Midler, and Diane Keaton, and Sarah Jessica Parker. And one of the I think everybody was saying the same line. It became a catchphrase, if you will. But don't get mad, get everything. So that was one of those moments in time where it's like, so if you're going to go get a divorce, that's what you need to think about, Don't get mad, get everything, and work it out in the court.
And she kind of had that reputation. I mean, the public, knew that because she fought, she got something better than she would have otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, she was, again, goes back to being a strong lady. And she launched her own clothing line because we all know, she had style. Whether she's, decorating a Trump-owned business. And then she also was part of the QVC when that first started, the home shopping network as well. She was selling her jewelry there. She wrote books. I have one of these books right here.
She did some
Free
real
to
estate.
Love. Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yes. I even have this signed. She
so have you
autographed
met?
this.
Where did you see her?
No, my mom met her at Sam's Club. Of all places.
In St. Louis?
Yeah, you'd think she would never go to a Sam's Club, but yeah. Yeah, in St. Louis.
So about what year would this have been?
This would have been, I believe, 1990, 91, 92, something in there, early 90s. But my mom got this for me.
Was that before the actual divorce?
No, this is after. Well, no, this had to been after the divorce. Yeah, let me see.
So you're talking about in the 90s?
Yeah, 92. That's it, 92. Did I say 82? 92.
No, you said like 90, 91. So it's probably
92.
Yeah.
Yeah. But she did autograph it for me. My mom got me a copy. So it says, "To Sherry, don't give up on your dreams." enjoy with a smiley face.
Huh. So,
So I got a copy.
I
This is
guess-
A Free to Love, which is a novel, but yet it's a fiction. But a lot of the characters, you can't help but wonder because there's some cheating going on. There's lots of money
Yeah.
involved, business.
yeah, and incidentally, she had a very strict non-disclosure agreement.
Oh, yes.
So, I mean, and how much maintenance was it that she got?
I think it was, well, at least as far as $650,000 annually in alimony and child support. So that must have been a combo there. And like you said, the custody of the kids. So
That was a ton of money at that time. Mm-hmm. So yeah, she was successful. Of course, if she had never done anything else, I mean, she was certainly in a strong financial position. She did some real estate investment.
did that too.
So she owned investment properties, I think some commercial as well as residential. She was a lady that was determined to work hard, and she was proud of her family, and she was a great mom, and she did marry 2 times, just very briefly. Those didn't amount to much. They were each
Not at all,
a
like
year.
about a year at the most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say Donald Trump was probably the love of her life, given that was
I
a
would
13
say that
year.
too. Yeah.
And she continued to
bond.
say good things about him afterwards. They both were a little unkind during the divorce.
As to be expected.
Yeah,
I mean, especially
but-
when you've been cheated on.
Yeah. But they both only had good things to say about each other shortly thereafter to the date of her death.
Yeah. And she's friendly with Melania.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. She was friendly. But boy, Marla, don't
No.
get in those two in a room.
So that's understandable too.
Oh, yes, yes. And she's actually buried at the golf course.
Really? By Mar-a-Lago, you mean?
Yeah, his golf course. Yeah. I want to double check on that, though, you guys.
No, that makes sense. I mean,
yeah.
apparently she loved Mar-a-Lago. She thought it was beautiful.
She's buried at the Trump National Golf Club in New Jersey.
Oh,
It's the
okay.
Bedminster,
All right.
New Jersey. That's where she's at.
Okay. I don't know as much about that.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it's beautiful.
Oh, I'm sure.
Okay, so we'll do another episode, and the next episode we'll just talk about the estate planning piece itself. But by setting this foundation, we can move pretty easily to that, and we will repeat a little bit of this, but I think only to the extent that it's useful in setting the stage. But we don't want to conclude this topic without taking some time to talk about the estate planning piece and how it was affected through the divorce and the planning that we've been able to discover. Remember, one of the handicaps we always have in doing this show is so many people in positions such as these, they tend to have trusts and they value confidentiality. So we have to dig around to get information as to what is probable or what it seems they did. And usually it's pretty reliable. Sometimes it's speculation by those who knew them. Sometimes it's speculation by, court personnel or even reporters in the city. But we do want to kind of conclude the topic by talking a little bit about the estate planning. So I hope that you found this interesting. I have to tell you, I didn't know that much about Ivana before we did this show, and the more I read about her, the more respect I have for her. Yeah. So it was interesting to me, and I hope you found it interesting and helpful to you as well. Till next time, this has been another episode of Life's Third Act. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed Life's Third Act, sponsored by Cordell & Cordell, your advisors for estate planning and beyond. Subscribe and join us weekly for thought-provoking discussion and topics exclusively focused on estate planning and your financial future. Discover more at CordellCordell.com. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.